There's certain things that are in the way of them seeing what needs to happen in order to scale. And if they don't get in touch with that, I call that their blind spot. If they don't get in touch with that blind spot, then they're going to unintentionally sabotage the future, which is
Hello and welcome to the Service-Based Business Society podcast. I am your host, Tiffany-Ann. If you're ready to scale your success, grow your business, and live that entrepreneurial life, click subscribe because we're about to get started. Hello and welcome back to the show. This week, we have very special guest, Michelle Denogean. Michelle focuses on the psychology of startup founders as a pathway to scalable success. If you've been listening for any length of time, you know that's what we're all about, scaling success, growing businesses. And when Michelle talked about tapping into superpowers beyond just your own, growing businesses, scaling success, I knew she was the perfect guest. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Michelle.
Thank you for having me, Tiffany.
We always dive in with a little bit of that journey discussion. So born and raised and still living in California, but what else can you tell us? How did you kind of get to where you are now?
Yeah, great question. So it's interesting because like you said, I'm born and raised here. I started out my career really wanting to be a creative. I kind of had that in me from the very beginning. Actually, to be honest with you, since I was my daughter's age, like since I was a teenager, I'm like, I will be an author and a creative. I, would watch some of the shows on advertising and marketing and be like, yes, I want to sit around the boardroom and I want to be able to envision these campaigns. And so I went to school for that and worked in a publishing company for a while. And I've been in and around the fringes of marketing. So that is true that did come to life. That's, who I became. I'm also the daughter of an accountant. And so as much as I tried to push the numbers away and push the business away, I never really avoided it. And a little bit of my story comes from a time when I guess I'll just call myself seasoned. I'm going to say seasoned. I was around when the internet started. And so I worked for a very, very one of the first internet startups back in the day. And I started to go to these boot camps where all of these people were getting millions of dollars and working out of their garages. And I had this epiphany that business is business and somebody's going to have to be there to help them. And that was actually the first time that I felt this pull and this attraction to the world of business. And that did fundamentally change my trajectory. So, you fast forward today, I've been, over 20 years working in startups. I have done all sorts of roles from operations to analytics to product and, of course, marketing, and worked my way up to the chief marketing officer role. I've been in that seat over 6 times now and love it. But I've also worked alongside founders for a very long time, which is really what drew me into the passion of advising other startup companies, is seeing these amazing founders starting companies and wanting to help them be successful. It kind of goes all the way back to that time frame when I went to that boot camp and saw all of these founders and realized that they needed support. So that's a little bit of my journey. And now I am still in an operating seat. I'm still a chief marketing officer for a startup in the travel and AI space called Mindtrip. But I also have my own advisory services on the side. And I've been doing that for almost a decade now.
The advising is truly, you get to be a part of so many businesses and ideas. It's one of the pieces that drew me away from corporate, is that you're a part of one thing, and it's amazing. It's two very different things, because when you're immersed in a business, you can make such a big impact because you're a part of multiple phases, and you get to know the team so well and whatnot. And then you move into this advising role and you get to see so many different things. And what excites me about those kind of founders and visionaries is I love the passion that many business owners have, and getting things off the ground, and whether it's a startup or kind of that next level growth. But that the passion and the visionary truly is exciting to be a part of.
Exactly. Yeah. And that is really what I see. I love the risk taking. I love the passion. I love the conviction they all have. I have a heart for it.
So you started in this kind of advisory role, and your website really talks about growth. So how has this kind of and I think advising kind of shifts. You talk about people back in the garage and that online startup. It's such an I find the internet, the timing of internet and how things have shifted. There was a time in business where if you weren't coaching, if you weren't building something on ClickFunnels, these were the two things that, there were 100 workshops and millions to be made and all of these types of things. And I think that there's been a little shift away from some of those because, like anything, it gets a little saturated. There's still a lot of people doing amazing things. But back, even a few years ago, this was if you were going to start something, you were going to be online, you had to be, coaching and building and doing these things. So you're talking about growth. How have you really kind of affected the space and what kind of clients do you typically work with?
I really focus on the psychology of the founder. I think it's something that comes very natural to a lot of people that have kind of foundational marketing backgrounds. We're observers by nature, right? That is what we do. We observe audiences, we observe people. We're usually pretty tied to the culture of a company. And I've just found that what I really can do is get in there and understand not just the founder, but the leadership team generally in that ecosystem of how they operate and work together. Because I believe that the cure to business failure is people. It's the people that you have around you that make all the difference, and making sure you have a balanced team with the right synergy and chemistry. And so I spend a lot of time in my advisory services looking at the makeup of the team and how people are working together. And do you have every single core competency that you need at the table in order to scale your company? So, of course, I have the marketing discipline. I could talk about that all day. But as I've evolved in my career, in my capabilities, and really honestly, my experience and what I've seen that I can contribute to people, that's really been my number one aha, which is it's the people. It's always the people.
Well, I think the people are where you can make some big influences. If you really kind of break down, the cycle of a business, yes, there's creating different campaigns and ads and marketing and reaching out to audiences. But once you have that dialed in and you know what's working, it will run on repeat with some modification, obviously. But, aside from tech failure, ultimately things shouldn't really break, if you will. But when you bring into people, now you've got cultural pieces, people have their own motivations, you've got all different personalities, you've got people that grow faster than others. And I think it oftentimes, especially when you're moving from startup to, maybe a slightly older business, one of the things that along the way is really challenging is people, people enjoy startup and you have one team. And then as the business grows, some people grow faster and some people maybe don't grow as fast. And you kind of end up with some people who are frustrated or just feels kind of out of joint. And that can really almost really slow the growth of the business down.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it really comes down to what are everybody's individual superpowers at the company? It's like, what is your gift? What is the thing that you do better than anybody else? I typically find, especially in an early stage startup, whatever that superpower is of the founder is typically how the company mirrors that. That is the superpower of the company. And as you bring people in, you have to look at how do I balance the thing that founder was really, really good at with all of the other superpowers that are needed for that team so that you can grow and scale. And that's not always easy as you're growing because you will typically have, your people around you when you first start the company. And that's great at the beginning. You can rely on your own superpower. It's what made you great. But over time, you have to complement that with other things. And so I think what really happens, my take on it anyways, is the founders of these companies or the initial, leadership team, there's certain things that are in the way of them seeing what needs to happen in order to scale. And if they don't get in touch with that, I call that their blind spot. If they don't get in touch with that blind spot, then they're going to unintentionally sabotage the future, which is exactly what they don't want to have happen. So that's why, I um, really believe that self-awareness and psychology is so much of business, more so than people really comprehend.
It's interesting because I think that, the almost blind confidence in yourself as an entrepreneur at times is so important to getting the business off the ground. I often go back to, different people who you look at their success, and I find very, very interesting. So I have this kind of guilty pleasure. I love the American Greed podcast. And so these are people who have ultimately kind of pulled the wool over people's eyes and done, often terrible things. But if you actually look at whatever made these people successful or positive, is these people just they ultimately believed what they were selling, even though it was wrong. And so and in any business, you have to believe when other people don't believe. So yes, those people take it too far and there's an issue there. But there's so many people that have to believe so much in what they are doing. But then there comes this point where now believing too much in what you're doing and not actually listening to the respected people around you. It's great to hire someone and think, oh, this person has a skill set I don't have. But if you spend the next year debating around a table or over Zoom or whatever with that person to only do what you want to do, the value that that person can bring is so muted. And so there's this confidence, but also this trust that the blind spot is a great way of explaining it, because truly there's so many businesses that get stifled because although you've hired great people, you're not actually listening.
That's right. Yeah. And the not listening is actually your typical downside to it. And people don't think about that because you're right. They start with so much confidence and conviction in their idea. But there has to become a reckoning that what made you great at starting is not going to be what makes you great at growing. And you need to be more open-minded. People just have a really hard time sometimes getting out of their own way to do that. And trust is the foundation, right? Trust that this is what you do best. And therefore, I'm going to rely on you. I'm going to empower you to do that. But oftentimes that empowerment gets derailed because I don't think that's important. That's usually how it manifests. It's sort of like, I don't think that's important. Therefore, I'm going to, push it aside or slow it down and it's really just because that's something that is in your blind spot that you can't recognize you need for growth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so true that what it took to get here is not what it's going to take to keep going. And I think that applies to so many things is, that age old expression, well, it's always worked, or it's worked for us so far, or whatnot. And you see it in so many pieces, whether it's, innovating or optimizing or adding team members or even changing up the product or offer a little bit. Times change and the offer, and it's often those who can stay, a little bit more dynamic and whatnot that can stand the test of time. I mean, if you look back at some companies like Blockbuster, once wildly successful, now it's, I saw a Blockbuster t-shirt the other day. It was like a vintage tee, and my young daughter was like, oh, and I was like, yeah, that used to be a Friday night. You would go down, you would pick out 2 movies, you would walk through all the snacks. My mom would be like, no, we're not buying popcorn here, we're making it at home. And you would go. And so you look at these things that at one time were pivotal, and done, gone. And so I'm sure that somewhere along the way, some smart person said, hey, guys, we need to change, we need to evolve. And someone was like, no, we're not going to do that. And that, that's a big company. Now, how much easier is that, to happen to a smaller organization or a startup where you just didn't keep growing?
Yeah, I think, there's something interesting that happens to people, especially as they, start a company and get going. In the very beginning, typically, they're very open to taking risks. That's what made them start. A lot of them, quit their jobs, all in, right? There's a lot of risk taking involved. But as the business starts to grow, the risk taking factors sometimes aren't as apparent anymore because now there's a lot to lose. And so like if we look over here, is that going to impact this business? And that's where a lot of bigger companies do kind of seize up, and they're not able to make those pivots.
Mm-hmm.
But pivoting is so important. I tell people all the time, pivots are actually your biggest opportunities. And people forget that a lot of the companies that we know and love today were not what they were when they are not what they are today, aren't what they were when they first started, right? When they
Mm-hmm.
first started the company, they were completely different. And I mean, there's lots of examples of this. YouTube is a great example. YouTube started as a online video dating website, and they couldn't for the life of them get women to post these videos, but they came upon this idea that people liked videos and education, and look, I mean, gosh, billions of dollars, right? So people forget that these companies were not what they are now back then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's just a plethora of others. Slack is another great example of that, right? Born from a tool they just kind of built to create efficiencies, but the company they were running before was a gaming company. So
Right.
being open to that could actually unleash your biggest opportunity, but a lot of people are very scared. They think a pivot equates to failure, instead of,
Yes.
hey, if we stay open and we kind of take in what's happening and what's in front of us and maneuver and pivot as we need, then success will be bred, like we'll be great. And unfortunately, people's mental models sometimes can't go there, but if you can, then you can have all the confidence in the world that you're going to be successful.
Yeah, it's maintaining the confidence and not really seeing it as failure. It's so many times it's well, hey, I put this out into the world and it didn't work, and and so, but really being able to reshape that and look at how many things that we consider wildly successful that made many changes. And I don't think that there's anyone out there that isn't that can't speak to some kind of failure, we'll call it, along the way, where something just didn't land quite as well as they thought, or maybe they, and oftentimes we look back and think, oh, I could have maybe I could have explained that different, or maybe with time you see where you could have made some adjustments. But as soon as you get into that it's a failure, I can't do this, then really it's that mindset is actually the biggest problem at all.
Yeah, that is where you can see your biggest breakthroughs. I mean, just even, put aside starting a business, just as a human, as a employee, as a leader, when you have your biggest failures in your career, that's the biggest growth opportunity. I mean,
Hmm.
that really is where I came into understanding my superpower, and my blind spot was, early in my career. I thought I was an amazing leader. I really did. In my head. In my head, I did. I really did. But
Yeah.
I also, I talk about in my book, in my advisory work, I talk about superpowers and that there's four of them. And I am what you call a connector, which means I love to, connect with people, build relationships, be out there with thought leadership and all those things. But the thing about connectors is they love control. They love it because it's their reputation. Their reputation gets intertwined with the company's reputation, right? And so I got all twisted in that early in my career. And I held the reins so tight on my team that I couldn't let them do what they needed to do to be super successful. And I hit like rock bottom failure. I had people on the team saying, like, we don't know the strategy, we don't feel involved, and that just really sat with me for a very, very, very long time. But it was the biggest eye opener. Sometimes that failure moment is like, wow, I wasn't being a great leader. I wasn't empowering teams. And I took that, it opened my eyes to my blind spot. And over the course of the, decade or so after that, I now can look back and I talk to people that have been my team. I have people that follow me to places because I am now an amazing leader and I empower teams. But it took that failure moment to be able to see that and to turn that around. And so again, I think personally those moments, whether it's a pivot or a failed, moment in your career, are your biggest opportunities for growth.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that, just because you have an amazing business idea and you're going to grow a business and then your business is successful and now you're adding a team, that doesn't mean that you're a great leader. That doesn't mean that and so there's so many business owners out there that the struggle in scaling the business is actually leadership, because now you need to influence the customers to purchase from you. You need to influence the team to believe in what you're doing and understand the culture and go out and do that. It's such an underappreciated skill that I think often kind of creeps up because the business is growing and they're kind of head down and we're going and, oh my goodness, we're successful, and oh, we need to hire, and and it's kind of in that. And then all of a sudden you kind of take that moment to look up and you're like, whoa, we have a team. We're growing. And leadership was never really something, we thought about how much money we were making. We thought about what is the next marketing thing. We thought, about how are we going to actually get all of that scheduled, but we didn't really ever think about that. And so I think that is such a key piece in that growth mode that shouldn't be lost. So you talk about the connector being one of those four pieces. So what are the other three?
Yeah. So first is the innovator. So the innovator is your problem solver. They're very solution oriented. They're curious. They're creative. These are the risk takers that are just going to dive in, understand your hurt, your pain point, and then develop a really unique solution to fit those needs. They're really, really great at gaining conviction and product market fit, for your audience. The connector, like we talked about, that's the relationship oriented reputation. They're going to own your reputation. Then there's the builder. The builder is all about process and analytics and data. They're going to help you raise money. They're going to be the ones that help you hire and ramp up your company. And the fourth one is the persuader, which is all about winning customers. They're the ones that you want in your pocket to negotiate any kind of deal. They are also very much a storyteller, so they have that in common with the connector, but it's all to a means to an end, right? They really are very focused on how do we, leverage these experiences, these stories, these moments to get, that negotiation done. So you need all four in your company. It is kind of like building a house, right? If you do not have four pillars to your house falls down. And that's the big thing that people, when they're starting companies, need to go from. My one superpower that made us great is perfect. It is exactly who I need to be. I don't need to learn to do these other things. I just need the people around me that are really good at those core competencies to grow my business. And so I think that's where people are like, oh, well, if I'm only one of those four superpowers, I'm not complete. No, that is amazing. That's great. Doesn't mean you don't have a little bit of something else, but you don't need to be the one to do everything. You need to empower your team to do those other things in order to scale your company.
Yes, so interesting. So as you were saying them, I thought when you're going through the innovator, I was like, that's me. Yep. Mm-hmm. And then you kept talking and I was like, then you said the builder and I was like, also kind of me. So now I feel like I'm hanging out in one of those places. I'll have to, do a little more research to really understand, where I live. I think
you can actually take, there's a quiz on my website.
Oh.
And you can actually, it's in my book too, but you can actually take the quiz and figure out which one you are more of. It is very possible that you are part innovator and part builder, but that means that you have to take a look at the other ones and like really ask yourself, where are you stopping people that that are in your world from being the fullest them? Because those are usually where your blind spots are. What they are good at is the thing where you feel like, I don't know if we need so much of that, right? So,
well, it's, you start to feel it's growing a business is very interesting and almost very humbling because, you do have to accept others are going to come in and be just better than you at certain things. And I often find, and this goes back to even my time in corporate, is, people start to grow, and then it's time for them to move up, and then they have someone really talented. And so, but they almost start to feel like, oh, that person might take my job. That person might make me look bad. That person. And so, and then they shy away from that, or they almost push that person down rather than really see it. And so, the old expression is a rising tide lifts all boats. And so, it's true. But in those moments, when you're actually in it and you start to feel that little bit threatened, then, it can be really a challenge. And as a business owner, you're thinking, hey, this is mine. This is my business. I make the decision. And it's a very even, corporate was one vibe of that. But, as a business owner, you start to think, well, what if this person, and how can they influence? And we get into our heads in those moments, I think, and start to overthink things more than we should.
Yeah. And that's where I think the self-awareness comes in play. You can't stop it from happening. You are who you are. And so as those things come up, you say, oh, I see it. I thank you. Thank you for, what you're saying to me. But I need to be very present to the fact that I need these people and why.
Yes.
And I think a lot of times, maturing in leadership is also understanding that when you hire somebody amazing, that is a reflection on you. And so, you can say to yourself instead, I did a good job. I brought this amazing, incredible human being into this company, and they are going to do great things. Mm-hmm. And so when you can get your mindset more in that world of like, hey, I don't need to make all the decisions, but that was the best decision I made. I hired this person.
Yes.
Then you can start to break down the walls and the, oh no, like, what does this mean about me? Because that is a reflection of you, that you hired that individual into your company.
Yeah, I think that, hiring the right people at the right times is truly the difference maker, aside from everything else. Because if you hire too early, or and you basically spend all of your budget on wages, then it puts you in a bad spot. But at the same time, if you think, oh, I'm just going to keep doing this myself, ultimately, not bringing in those people and, brilliant minds in those different areas truly can make such a difference. You're talking about, basically, the innovator and the builder. And I'm thinking, oh, yes, well, I know that I'm not the connector, and I know that I'm not, what was the fourth one? Persuader. See, I know so that I'm not that. So my brain was like, no, we are not the persuader.
I put it in my pocket. Nope, or as my daughter would say, lock it, put it in your pocket.
There you go. I like that. Yeah, my brain was like, oh, that one's gone. So, it's interesting. We were doing another podcast interview recently, and we were talking about sales. And I said, my goal when I started was, I need to learn to sell enough that my business can grow to the size that I can hire a salesperson. That was my thing, because I was like, I know that whoever who is really talented at that is so much more efficient. Can I sell? Sure. I mean, my business grows, we're selling. So yes, but am I the best for that job? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. My talents are way better spent other places. And so you have to, whether you have a small business, a large business, whether you're rich, you're broke, you still have 24 hours, and you have a certain amount of resources, and you gotta use them the best way that you can.
Exactly. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it is important to know, I'm also not a persuader, but I've been in marketing and led, full stack marketing teams for most of my career. I'm the person that goes to the conference and knows everybody, meets everybody. And I can bring a relationship to the table like there's nobody's business, and then, introduce them to the person that is actually going to, when they're ready, right? Because I am always that person that's like, well, if you think you want what we have, like, I'm happy to talk about that, but let's talk about your business and the problems that you have today. I'm very much more holistic. And so I need to have that person by my side that can be like, oh, have you met Tiffany-Ann or whoever, like, have you met this person? Let me introduce you. And I think it is really just knowing yourself, honestly, just being very aware of what your strength is and where you need those other people around you to complete you, to build your business.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. We talked at the beginning about, early on people building their businesses and different things that were super popular. When I started my business, the Facebook group was the thing. Everybody needed a Facebook group. Now, knowing that I'm not the connector, so, we start this Facebook group and we're going and at the same time we were actually running a 12-month mastermind, and we would have all like weekly calls and whatnot. And one of my good friends was on some of these calls, and I want to solve the problems. It's like, let's bring the problems to the calls. Let's solve them. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. And so I was like, there was it was draining for me to try and connect on an ongoing weekly basis. And I said to my good friend who was a part of the mastermind, and I said, I feel like there's just so much discussion about, like the personal, and, I'm fighting with my husband and therefore I can't. I'm like, I'm not qualified to tell you what to do about your fighting with your husband. I mean, like, I don't know. This is not me. Do we have some like legitimate, tangible problems here? And I know you're laughing but it was exhausting for me because I was doing things that were outside of who I really was. And so, in the end, I decided, hey, we're not doing a Facebook group because this is not like, I'm not good at this and you're not really enjoying this because I'm not good at this. And I am dreading doing it because this is not my thing. And so sometimes we have to really just decide which lane do we belong in, because when you actually are in your own lane, then you can be so much more successful. And because burnout, doing things that are so far out of I was like, I'm willing to be uncomfortable. I can do this. I'll figure it out. And it's like, okay, I did it and I could be uncomfortable. But in the end, you have to decide what actually makes the difference. What is actually driving success?
Yeah, agreed. And that is, leading with your strength. And that's going to always be an outsized effort than trying to do something that you're not.
Yes. Absolutely. So if you had one tip for a business owner to, that they could go and they could implement right away, what would that be?
Yeah, I would tell people to spend some time thinking about your blind spot. That would be my biggest tip, because it is the one thing that is in the way of you empowering teams, of you leading, to greatness. And if you can really understand what that is for yourself, where the thing is that you just would rather do anything other than that. Usually that's where it lives. Like if you make a list of 10 things and it's always at the bottom, no matter what you check off above it, you just keep like adding things above it. Usually that is around where your blind spot is. And so if you can get in touch with that and understand that, then that's the first step for me in being an amazing leader and building a great company. So do the work. It is more of a mental, emotional work than it is a, one task that you can do, but I think it will pay dividends. And remember, every superpower has a blind spot. And so, in my book and on my website, you can read a little bit more about that. Is a fast path to that, but everybody has to do their own self-discovery.
So about that book and the quiz, where can people find them?
Yeah, so the book is called Grow Up. Take your startup to the next level. It's grow up, one word, just like the word startup. It's a play on that word. That you can find on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere else that you would buy online. But definitely Amazon has it. I know that's where a lot of people buy books these days. My website is probably the best place to learn a little bit about me and the book and my advisory services. And that is michelledenogean.com. And then so you can contact me there. You can also contact me on LinkedIn. That's where I do most of my social living, online social living. And that's just at Michelle Denogean, pretty easy. Nice to have a unique last name. So
Yes, perfect. And I will link those in the show notes as well. Michelle, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And I think that blind spots and self-awareness as we want to grow and scale any, whether that's from startup to next level, or, you've been doing this for a while and you are really looking to move it to the next level. That piece of, what really can I do as a business owner to make that difference, self-awareness. So I am to check out that quiz and I encourage our listeners to do the same. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Don't forget to click subscribe, like, comment below and share the episode with a fellow entrepreneur. If you want to take our episodes on the road, they are available everywhere you listen to podcasts. Thanks so much. See you next time.